Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The mother-in-law and her son flew to Cancun on the daughter-in-law's money, leaving her at home with the children. That's when the daughter-in-law took out the folder with the apartment documents where her mother-in-law lived and started dialing the realtor's number. Elena sat on the edge of the worn-out couch, flipping through old photographs. The apartment smelled of medicine and old age, a scent that seemed to have seeped into the walls over the many years of her grandmother's life. Dolores Ramirez had passed away quietly in her sleep, leaving behind a two-room apartment in a brick building in an old district, outdated furniture, and boxes of black and white photographs. "Mom, look, who is this?" 6-year-old Sophia held out a yellowed photo. Elena looked at the picture and smiled. Young grandma in a white dress with a lace collar stood next to a tall man in military uniform. "This is your great-grandmother Dolores and great-grandfather Antonio. See, what a beautiful couple they were." She ran her finger along the edge of the photo. "There was a war at the time, and they got married the day before he was sent to the front. Why didn't you bring these photos home earlier?" Sophia frowned, studying other pictures. "Well," Elena hesitated. "Grandma didn't get along with Dad's mom, so she kept everything here." That was putting it mildly. Grandma Dolores and Mercedes Fernandez, her mother-in-law, couldn't stand each other. Two women, two personalities, too strong to yield. Dolores Ramirez called Mercedes Fernandez a pretentious woman with airs of aristocracy, while Mercedes responded with a contemptuous country bumpkin. Elena sighed, feeling heavy and empty inside. Grandma was gone, leaving her with this apartment and the freedom to decide what to do with it. "Just don't sell it right away, Elena," Grandma had said a month before her death. "The apartment is your support. You never know when you'll need it." "Mom, are we going to live here?" Sophia tugged at her sleeve, pulling her out of her thoughts. "Not right now, sweetie," Elena kissed her daughter on the top of her head. "We have our own house. You and Miguel are more comfortable there." Sophia nodded and returned to the box of photos. Elena looked out the window. The yard was quiet, with a playground and old palm trees. The neighborhood wasn't the most prestigious, but it was cozy, with good infrastructure, a school and clinic nearby, and just a 15-minute walk to the metro. The phone rang. The screen showed husband. "Yes, Carlos," she answered, trying to keep her voice calm. "Are you guys coming soon?" "Mom's made dinner. It's going to get cold." "Half an hour more. I need to sort a few things out." "All right," her husband's voice was tinged with impatience. "Just don't take too long. Mom will be upset." Elena rolled her eyes. Mercedes Fernandez and her constantly cooling dinners. The conversation with her husband spoiled her mood. She surveyed the apartment, worn-out wallpaper, creaky parquet, Franco-era furniture. But there was something genuine here. No one here spoke in whispers, afraid of waking poor Mercedes Fernandez, who always had migraines. There was no need to listen to comments about how she was raising the children wrong, cooking paella wrong, or folding towels incorrectly. "Sophia, get ready, we need to go," she said, putting the photos back in the box. On the way home, Elena couldn't stop thinking about the apartment. She mentally calculated how much the repairs would cost, which furniture could be kept, and which would need replacing. Maybe she could rent out the apartment for a while? Extra income wouldn't hurt, especially with their mortgage and increasing medical expenses for Miguel. Miguel, her younger son, had been born with problems, a heart defect requiring constant monitoring and occasional treatment. He was only 3, but had already undergone 2 surgeries, and it wasn't over yet. Elena gripped the steering wheel tighter. Money, the eternal issue that was starting to give her a headache. Carlos earned decently, but expenses were high. The mortgage ate up almost half of their combined income, and when the costs for Miguel's medication were added. She turned onto their street and saw the familiar high-rise, the 12th floor, a 1-bedroom apartment converted into a 2-bedroom by reducing the kitchen size. Their family nest, bought with a mortgage 5 years ago, and in this nest, Mercedes Fernandez had been living for 2 years now, having sold her apartment and decided to temporarily move in with her son and daughter-in-law. Finally, Mercedes Fernandez greeted them in the hallway, casting a pointed glance at the wall clock. I was starting to think I'd have to throw out dinner. Hello, Doña Mercedes, Elena smiled her most neutral smile. Sorry for the delay, I had to sort a few things out. Abuelita, Sophia rushed to hug her grandmother. We were looking at old photos. Great-grandma was so beautiful. Yes, yes, sweetie, Mercedes Fernandez absent-mindedly patted her granddaughter on the head. Go wash your hands, dinner's getting cold. Carlos is already at the table, Miguelito is waiting too. Elena walked into the kitchen. It was small, only 6 square meters, and seemed even smaller due to the abundance of kitchen equipment that Mercedes Fernandez had brought with her. Elena, you don't mind if I set up my microwave, do you? It's newer. And my slow cooker, it has more programs. In the end, every inch of the countertop was occupied. Carlos sat at the table, glued to his phone, while Miguel, in his high chair, enthusiastically smeared porridge on the tray. Hi. Elena kissed her husband on the cheek. How was your day? Fine, he didn't look up from the screen. You were gone a long time. I told you, I needed to. Yeah. Carlos waved his hand. Mom was alone with Miguel the whole evening. Elena pressed her lips together but didn't respond. She didn't want to start an argument in front of the kids. Well, did you manage the inheritance from Grandma? Mercedes Fernandez brought a pot of stewed meat into the kitchen. Not yet, Elena helped Sophia sit down. There's still a lot of work to do. And what do you plan to do with the apartment? Mercedes Fernandez placed a plate in front of Carlos. I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll rent it out. Rent it out? Mercedes Fernandez raised an eyebrow in surprise. Why? You should sell it. Money is always useful. I don't want to sell it. Elena replied firmly. Grandma didn't want me to sell it. But Grandma won't know, Mercedes Fernandez snorted, and won't money come in handy? Carlito said he wants to change the car. Elena glanced at her husband. He was chewing intently, avoiding her gaze. We haven't discussed that yet, she said, trying to stay calm. Well, then discuss it. Mercedes Fernandez smiled her signature smile, lips stretched thin, eyes cold. Carlos, darling, you wanted a new car, right? Elena's inheritance is just right for that. Mom, let's not do this now, Carlos mumbled, still not looking at his wife. When then? Mercedes Fernandez pressed on. The apartment is in a good area, you could get a decent amount for it. Enough for the car and a vacation. We could all go somewhere together, the kids can get some sea air. I'm not selling the apartment. Elena put down her fork. At least, not now. And I'd like Carlos and I to decide these things on our own. Of course, Mercedes Fernandez pursed her lips. I was just suggesting, I wanted what's best. Dinner continued in tense silence, broken only by Sophia's chatter and Miguel's chewing. After dinner, Elena was washing the dishes when Carlos approached her. You shouldn't have been like that with Mom, he said quietly. It wasn't advice, Carlos. Elena wiped her hands with a towel. It was an attempt to take control of my inheritance, mine, not ours. Oh, come on. He grimaced. What's the difference? We're family, and Mom's right, the money would help, especially now with all the expenses. Exactly because of all these expenses, I don't want to sell the apartment. Do you know how much we still need for Miguel's surgeries? You're exaggerating. Carlos rubbed his nose. The doctors say everything's going well. And besides, there's insurance, quotas. That aren't enough. Elena raised her voice but immediately quieted down, remembering the children in the other room. Listen, I don't want to argue. Just understand, this inheritance is from my grandmother, and it's important for me to do what she wanted. Okay, Carlos raised his hands in surrender. Do it your way, just don't upset Mom. Elena simply nodded. A lump formed in her throat. She suddenly felt an overwhelming exhaustion. After putting the kids to bed, she sat on the edge of Miguel's crib, stroking his dark hair. He was sleeping, breathing softly, so small and defenseless. At 3 years old, he had already gone through more than some adults. She leaned down and kissed her son on the forehead, listening to his breath. That night, Elena couldn't fall asleep. Carlos was breathing evenly next to her, and she stared at the ceiling, thinking about the future. Grandma's apartment was like a backup airfield, another door that could open if necessary, and Elena felt that someday she would need that door. "Do you mind if I take my old sewing machine?" Mercedes Fernandez asked at breakfast when she and Carlos were getting ready to leave for work. "Sewing machine?" Elena didn't understand. "Yes, a Singer, an antique, with a foot pedal. I left it in my apartment when I sold it. I thought the new owners would throw it out, but it's still there. I called the realtor yesterday, and he said it's still there and the new owners don't mind giving it back." "And what does this have to do with me?" Elena still didn't get it. "Well, you see, I need to take it, but I don't have anywhere to keep it. And you know, every inch counts here." Mercedes Fernandez scanned the cramped kitchen. "So I thought maybe we could put it in Grandma's apartment. There's plenty of space, no one's living there." Elena felt a wave of irritation rise inside her. Typical tactics, first the sewing machine, then something else, and then once my things are there, maybe I'll move in too. "Sorry, Doña Mercedes, but I don't want to turn the apartment into a storage space. I still need to go through a lot of things there and throw some out. But it's just one sewing machine." Mercedes Fernandez threw up her hands. "An antique, by the way. Why throw it out? Let it sit in the corner, it won't bother anyone." "No," Elena said firmly. "I want to figure out my plans for the apartment first." She saw her mother-in-law's face change, the sweet smile disappeared, and her eyes narrowed. "How rude." Mercedes Fernandez pursed her lips. "I just asked for a favor. Is it really so hard to help your husband's mother?" Carlos shifted his gaze from his mother to his wife. Elena knew that look, he didn't want to take sides. "Elena, what's the big deal?" he finally said. "It's just one sewing machine." "There you go," Mercedes Fernandez exclaimed triumphantly. "Carlos understands. This is my apartment." "No, it's my apartment. Family should help each other." Elena felt cornered. If she refused now, she would look selfish in her husband's eyes. But if she agreed, it would be the first step toward her mother-in-law taking control of this apartment too. "Fine," she relented. "You can put the sewing machine, but only that one. Agreed?" Of course, darling." Mercedes Fernandez beamed. "Thank you. I knew you wouldn't refuse." In her mother-in-law's eyes, Elena saw that familiar triumph, a small victory in the big war. 2 months passed. The temporary sewing machine in Grandma's apartment was joined by a dresser. It's just taking up space in your hallway, an old china set, antique, too good to throw away, and 2 boxes of unclear contents. Just documents, old papers, who knows, they might come in handy. And then came the idea that Elena had sensed from the very beginning. "You know, Elena," Mercedes Fernandez said at dinner, "I was thinking, it's a bit cramped for all 4 of us in the 1-bedroom apartment. Don't you think? I'm starting to feel like I'm in your way. You're a young family, with children, you need space." Elena became alert. Her mother-in-law had never mentioned needing space before. "And I thought," Mercedes Fernandez continued, "maybe I could temporarily move into Grandma's apartment. My things are already there, and there's more space. You could live comfortably, without feeling cramped." There it was, the trap had snapped shut. Elena glanced at her husband. Carlos didn't look surprised. His mother had probably discussed this with him beforehand. "I'm not sure that's a good idea," Elena began cautiously. "The apartment needs repairs. The wiring is old." "Nonsense," her mother-in-law dismissed her. "I'm not fussy, plus the repairs can be done gradually. Carlito will help with the wiring, he's handy." "Mom's right," Carlos spoke up. It will be more convenient for everyone, Mom will be more comfortable, and we'll have more space. Elena felt her throat tighten. They had already decided everything without her. But I plan to rent out the apartment. She made one last attempt. Extra income would help, especially with Miguel's medical expenses. Oh, don't worry about that. Mercedes Fernandez smiled. I'll pay you rent. Not as much as strangers would, of course, but still a decent amount. From what money? Elena asked directly. You don't have a regular income apart from your pension. I have savings from the sale of the apartment. Her mother-in-law slightly pursed her lips. I didn't spend it all, you know. Elena barely held back a skeptical smile. In 2 years of living together, Mercedes Fernandez had never once offered to help with utilities or groceries, but she regularly spoke about her shopping trips and vacations to the seaside with her friends. How much do you plan to pay? Elena asked. Well, let's say 8,000 pesos a month. For family, that's more than enough. 8,000, half the market price. And Elena was sure that even this amount would be paid for only a couple of months, and then the difficulties, unexpected expenses, and other excuses would begin. I need to think about it, she finally said. What's there to think about? Mercedes Fernandez threw up her hands. The decision is obvious. Tell her, Carlos. Elena, really, her husband put his hand on her shoulder. It will be better for everyone, for Mom and for us. Miguel needs his own space, you've said that yourself. Elena looked at her son. Miguel was sitting in his high chair, concentrating on spreading his puree across his plate. He did need a proper environment, but she knew the price they would have to pay for this decision. Fine, she finally said. But on certain conditions. First, we make a rental agreement, even if it's unofficial. Second, the payment must be on time, without delays. And third, this is a temporary solution, until you find another place. Mercedes Fernandez beamed. Of course, darling. I understand, and of course, this is temporary, until I find something more suitable. 2 or 3 months, no more. Elena nodded, but deep down she already knew, those 2 to 3 months would stretch on for a long time, possibly forever. 2 months turned into 6 months, 6 months into a year. Mercedes Fernandez settled into Grandma's apartment and started cosmetic repairs at her own expense. Elena, don't worry. And of course, she forgot about the promise to find another place. She paid the rent 3 times, then came the temporary difficulties and unforeseen expenses. Elena worked as a kindergarten teacher, did tutoring on the side, and saved every penny for Miguel's treatment. Carlos, absorbed in work and his own concerns, participated less and less in solving family issues, agreeing more and more with his mother. Then Elena found out that Mercedes Fernandez was planning a vacation. To Cancun? Seriously? Elena couldn't believe her ears when her mother-in-law casually mentioned it during Sunday dinner. What's the big deal? Mercedes Fernandez shrugged. I found a good last-minute deal, it's a sin not to use it. Plus, I haven't been on vacation for 2 years. And what about the temporary difficulties and lack of money for rent? Elena didn't even try to hide the sarcasm. Well, that's a different budget, her mother-in-law pursed her lips. I've been saving for the vacation for a long time. It's sacred. But paying all that money for a tiny apartment that would be empty anyway. That could be bringing in decent income if I were renting it out at market price, Elena countered. Are you feeling sorry for your husband's mother? Mercedes Fernandez went on the offensive. By the way, watch your children, cook for everyone. Isn't that enough? We didn't ask you to watch the kids instead of paying rent. Elena snapped. Elena, enough. Carlos intervened. Why are you getting so worked up? So what if Mom's going on vacation? She deserves a break. And what about Miguel's treatment? Elena quietly asked. We need money for the next surgery. Every penny counts. Elena gritted her teeth, holding back a flood of words that might spill out. How could she explain to these people that a heart defect wasn't like a cold that could be outgrown? How could she make them understand that the money spent on the vacation could have gone toward treatment that would help her grandson live a normal life? And then Elena thought for the first time that maybe it was time to put an end to this situation, that it was time to take back control of the apartment, her life, and her children's future. That evening, she sat for a long time by Miguel's crib, looking at his pale face, and made the decision that would change her entire life. Elena sat at the kitchen table, reviewing bank statements and medical reports. It had gotten dark outside, but she didn't turn on the light. The dimness helped her focus. The numbers on the laptop screen felt like mockery. The next treatment course for Miguel cost 140,000 pesos. They had only saved 60,000. Their family budget had long since turned into a patchwork quilt of loans, emergency borrowing, and constant savings, 2 extra lessons with the kids in the evening, working as a copywriter at night, and still, the money was catastrophically insufficient. The door creaked. Elena hurriedly closed the laptop. Can't sleep? Carlos walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. I'm counting the money for Miguel's surgery. She rubbed her tired eyes. I've got almost 80,000. Her husband mumbled, pulling out a beer bottle. Maybe it's not so urgent. The doctor said we could wait until autumn. He said it's better to do it before autumn, Elena corrected. The sooner, the better the result. Carlos sat down across from her, opening the bottle. I understand, but he took a sip. I'm going through a tough time at work. There won't be any bonuses until autumn. And Mom's asking me to fly with her to Cancun. I need a break too. I'm tired at work. The money we saved for treatment would be just enough for a ticket. Elena looked closely at her husband. When they married 6 years ago, Carlos was a completely different person, attentive, caring, willing to move mountains for the family. Now, the man sitting across from her was tired, avoiding responsibility and difficult decisions. Have you lost your mind? You're not going to Cancun. And if we were renting out Mom's apartment at market price, she began cautiously, we'd already have the needed amount. Here you go again. Carlos winced. I asked you not to bring it up. But it's the truth. Elena insisted. Your mom has been living there for 3 years for free. If she paid even 15,000 pesos a month, she doesn't have that kind of money. She found money for Cancun. Elena couldn't hide the bitterness in her voice. And for a new phone and a fur coat. Mom has her priorities. Carlos finished his beer and slammed the bottle onto the table. You can't tell her how to spend her money. But I can tell you how much the rent for MY apartment costs. Our apartment. Carlos corrected. My apartment. Elena said firmly. This is my inheritance from my grandmother, and legally it's only mine. I have every right to do with it as I see fit. Carlos stood up, looming over her. And how do you see fit? To throw my mother out onto the street? I didn't say throw out. Elena also stood up, unwilling to stay in a subordinate position. I'm talking about normal rent or for her to finally find a place for herself, like she promised 3 years ago. She doesn't have money for another place. Carlos raised his voice. She spent it all. On what? On endless shopping sprees and trips? That's her choice. And now our child has to suffer because of her irresponsibility? Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. Carlos slammed his fist on the table. She helps us with the kids, cooks, and cleans. When it's convenient for her. Elena also raised her voice, forgetting about the sleeping children. But as soon as it comes to money or serious help, she suddenly has a migraine or important meeting with friends. They fell silent, breathing heavily, staring at each other across the table. Carlos was the first to look away. I don't want to argue, he said tiredly. Just understand, I can't kick my mom out. She's my mother. And I'm the mother of your children, Elena replied quietly. And I will do everything to make sure they are healthy and happy, even if that means making unpopular decisions. Carlos turned silently and left the kitchen. A minute later, the front door slammed. He had gone to clear his head, as he always did after arguments. He would return late, a little tipsy, and they would pretend nothing had happened, as usual. Elena sank into a chair, feeling a tightening inside her from the hopelessness of it all. In the next room, the children were quietly snoring. For their sake, she had endured, sought compromises, and tried to keep the family together. But with each passing day, it was becoming harder. The next morning, Elena woke up to the sound of the phone ringing. On the screen, Mercedes Fernandez appeared. "Hello," she replied sleepily, glancing at the clock. It was 7:30 a.m. Carlos was still asleep beside her. "Elena, hello," her mother-in-law's voice rang with cheerfulness. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No, Elena cleared her throat. "I wasn't asleep anymore." "Great. I'm calling to let you know that I won't be able to pick up Miguelito from daycare today. I have an appointment with the cosmetologist, completely forgot about it." Elena closed her eyes and counted to 5. "But you promised." "I have 2 extra lessons today, I can't leave early." "Oh, sweetie, you'll figure something out." Mercedes Fernandez's voice had no trace of regret. "Maybe Carlito can pick him up? He has an important meeting today, didn't he tell you yesterday?" "Really?" Her mother-in-law pretended to be surprised. "I don't remember." "Well, never mind, ask one of the other moms at daycare or just call a taxi. Miguelito is a big boy, he'll manage." "He's 4 years old," Elena bit out. "And he has a weak heart. I can't send him in a taxi." "Oh, you're always making dramas." Mercedes Fernandez clearly lost her patience. "Fine, I'll try to reschedule my appointment, but I can't promise anything." Before Elena could respond, her mother-in-law had already hung up. These kinds of conversations had become the norm. Mercedes Fernandez would agree to help with the kids, and then at the last moment find a reason to back out. Elena carefully got out of bed, trying not to wake her husband. Their relationship had become strained in recent months. Carlos was staying at work later and later, paying less attention to financial and child-related problems, and when Elena tried to have a serious conversation, he would either joke or get irritated. In the kitchen, she turned on the kettle and grabbed her phone. She needed to urgently find someone to pick up Miguel from daycare. Scrolling through her contacts, Elena stopped at the name Gabriela R. They had met at the playground a few months ago when Gabriela was with her nephew. It turned out she worked as a realtor and lived nearby. Maybe Gabriela could advise me about the apartment. Elena thought and, without hesitation, wrote a message. "Hi. Sorry for the early message. Could you help me with renting out an apartment? I'm in a tough situation." The reply came almost instantly. "Hi. Of course. Let's talk after 10, I'm in a meeting right now." Elena felt a slight sense of relief. At least she would be able to figure out what to do next. They met at a small cafe near the daycare. Gabriela, a tall brunette with lively brown eyes, listened attentively, occasionally making notes in her notebook. "So," she summarized when Elena finished her story, "your mother-in-law has been living in your apartment for 3 years, paying almost nothing, and refuses to move out or pay market price." "That's exactly it." Elena warmed her hands on the cappuccino cup. "And my husband is completely on her side. You do realize that legally you can evict her at any time?" Gabriela set down her pen. "The apartment is in your name only. By law, you have the full right to do whatever you want with it." "I understand," Elena sighed. "But it's not just about the legal side. She's my husband's mother. If I just throw her out, Carlos will never forgive me. You need to decide what's more important." Gabriela looked at her intently, "your son's health or your relationship with your mother-in-law?" Elena was silent, thinking about those words. Really, what's more important? The answer was obvious, but making the decision was still difficult. "I can rent the apartment for much more, right?" she finally asked. "Definitely," Gabriela nodded. "A 2-bedroom in that neighborhood is currently renting for at least 15,000 to 18,000 pesos a month, excluding utilities." If your mother-in-law moves out, I can find tenants quickly, within a week, maximum 2. I'll help with the paperwork and tenant selection. Also, Gabriella lowered her voice, it's often easier to deal with strangers than with relatives. At least they pay on time. Elena gave a wry smile. You're right. I just don't know how to tell Carlos about this. Maybe try talking again, explain the situation with Miguel's treatment money. He is a father, after all. I've tried, Elena shook her head. Many times. He either changes the subject or accuses me of selfishness. How can you do this to my mom? She helps us. And does she really help? Gabriella asked skeptically. Elena paused. Does she help? Sometimes she picks up the kids from daycare, sometimes she cooks dinner, but even that help isn't constant and is always accompanied by reminders of how self-sacrificing Mercedes Fernandez is as a grandmother. Not as much as she could, Elena answered honestly. And certainly not enough to justify free accommodation for 3 years. Gabriella shook her head. You know, I had a similar situation with a client. Her mother-in-law temporarily moved into her apartment and then refused to leave. In the end, the woman took extreme measures. She just changed the locks when her mother-in-law went away for the weekend. It's harsh, of course, but effective. I can't do that. Elena imagined Carlos and Mercedes Fernandez's reactions. That would be a scandal for life. Then try a formal notice. Gabriella opened her notebook. Write a letter stating that starting from a certain date, the rent will be this much, and if she refuses, you'll have to find other tenants. Give her a month to make a decision. And you think this will work? Honestly, I don't know, Gabriella shrugged. But it's a legal way, and your husband won't be able to accuse you of acting behind his back. It's all official, all by the rules. Elena nodded. This option seemed the most reasonable. At least this way, she'd give her mother-in-law the chance to make the right choice. Now the hardest part remained, talking to her husband. Carlos returned late, tired and irritable. Not the best time for a serious conversation, but Elena decided not to wait any longer. We need to talk, she said when he came out of the shower. Not now, okay? Carlos collapsed onto the bed. I'm exhausted. This is important, she insisted. It's about Miguel's treatment. Carlos sighed but sat up, showing he was listening. I'm listening. Elena took a deep breath and started. I've decided that starting from the 1st, I'm going to rent Grandma's apartment at market price. Your mom can stay if she pays the full amount, or she can find another place. She expected an outburst of anger, but Carlos just rubbed his face tiredly. Here we go again. I told you, Mom doesn't have that kind of money. She's had 3 years to find somewhere else to live. Elena said firmly. 3 years, Carlos. She promised to stay for a couple of months and ended up staying for 3 years. In that time, she could have saved up for a down payment or found a cheaper apartment. Easier for you to say, he snapped. You have your own apartment, and Mom has nothing. Because she spent all the money from selling her apartment on furs and vacations. Elena felt her temper rise. That's her choice. But why should our child suffer because of her irresponsibility? What does Miguel have to do with this? Carlos frowned. What does it have to do with Miguel? We need money for his treatment. Elena grabbed the folder with the medical documents. Look at this, the next surgery is 140,000 pesos. We only have 60,000. If we rent the apartment for 15,000 a month, we can save the rest in 5 months. Why is it so expensive? Don't we have quotas? We've already used this year's quota, Elena sighed. And we can't wait until next year. You heard the doctor. Maybe we can take out a loan? Carlos suggested uncertainly. We already have a mortgage and 2 personal loans, Elena reminded him. They won't give us any more. Carlos was silent, staring at the documents. Finally, he looked up. So what are you suggesting? Throw my mom out on the street? I'm offering her a choice. Elena handed him the letter she had written. Either she pays market price or finds another place. She'll have a month to decide. Carlos skimmed the text, and his face darkened. You've already decided everything, haven't you? Without even consulting me. I'm trying to consult with you now, Elena spoke calmly. But every time I bring up this issue, you dismiss it or get angry. Because you're demanding the impossible. Carlos threw the letter onto the bed. Mom can't pay 15,000 pesos. And where is she supposed to go? Out on the street? With the money she spends on cosmetologists and furs, she could rent a room or a one-bedroom apartment farther from the center. Elena felt her patience slipping. Or she could get a job. She's only 58, she's fully capable. But no. Why work when she can live off her son and daughter-in-law and still demand thanks? Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. Carlos jumped up from the bed. She's worked her whole life, she deserves a break. And our son deserves proper treatment. Elena stood up too. What's more important to you, your mom's comfort or your son's health? Carlos looked at her with a fury she rarely saw in his eyes. You're putting me in an impossible situation. Life put you in that situation, not me, Elena said quietly. And I've already made my choice in favor of our child. Carlos stood in silence, clenching his fists. Then he turned sharply, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Carlos. Elena called after him. We're not finished talking. For me, it's over, he called back over his shoulder. Do whatever you want, just don't expect me to participate in throwing my mother out. The door slammed behind him so hard that the dishes in the cupboard rattled. In the next room, Miguel woke up crying from the noise. Elena closed her eyes, feeling tears roll down her cheeks. She took a deep breath, wiped her face, and went to calm her son. That night, Carlos didn't return home. For 3 days, he didn't show up, sending only brief messages. Then, finally, a call. Yes? She tried to keep her voice neutral. We need to talk, her husband said without preamble. Can you come to Mom's? Elena smirked, of course, to the enemy's territory. No, I can't, I have the kids, and I'm not going to drag them back and forth for a conversation that can be had at our house. Elena, don't complicate things. Carlos's voice was filled with impatience. It's important. It's also important to me that my husband sleeps at home, not hiding at his mom's for 3 days, she retorted. If you want to talk, come here. There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. Okay, I'll be there in an hour. Elena hung up the phone and looked at the clock. It was almost 6. Miguel was playing in the corner with his toy cars. Sophia was drawing at the table. A normal evening, which was about to turn into a battlefield. She decided not to waste time and prepared the folder with the documents, the account statement where they had saved money for Miguel's treatment, the medical reports, preliminary calculations from the clinic, everything that could confirm her words about the need for extra funds. Exactly 1 hour later, the doorbell rang. Carlos stood at the door with a small gym bag, as if he had come for a visit, not come back home. Dad. Sophia ran up to him with a joyful squeal. Hi, Princess. He scooped her up and hugged her tightly. I missed you. Elena silently watched the scene, feeling a mixture of emotions, anger at her husband for leaving them for 3 days, relief that he had returned, and fear of the upcoming conversation. Have the kids had dinner? Carlos asked as he put Sophia down. Yes, Elena nodded. Miguel is finishing a cartoon, and I'll put them to bed. Then we'll talk. Carlos nodded and went to the kitchen. She heard him open the fridge, pour something, and rattle the dishes, that familiar homey sound that suddenly felt more painful. It was as if everything was normal again, as if these 3 days of absence and cold messages never happened. When the kids finally fell asleep, Elena went back to the kitchen. Carlos was sitting at the table, looking at his phone. There was an empty plate in front of him. So, what did you want to talk about? She sat down across from him, placing the folder with documents in front of her. Carlos looked up. His eyes showed exhaustion. I spoke to Mom. She's in shock from your decision. Not surprising, Elena shrugged. Who would like to pay for something they used to get for free? Elena, you understand she doesn't have that kind of money. Carlos leaned forward. Where is she supposed to go? She has no other place to live. And when she sold her apartment, did she think about where she'd go? Elena tried to keep her voice calm, though inside she was boiling. Or did she think she'd always be able to live at our expense? She thought her family would support her. Carlos frowned. That her son and daughter-in-law wouldn't throw her out onto the street. We didn't throw her out for 3 years, Carlos. Elena raised her voice but immediately caught herself, remembering the sleeping children. She's been living in my apartment for free for 3 years. She promised to stay for a couple of months, but she hasn't even looked for another place. She has been looking, he replied uncertainly. She just hasn't found anything suitable. Really? Elena raised an eyebrow skeptically. And how many places has she looked at in these 3 years? 2? 3? Or none at all? Carlos fell silent, turning his gaze away. They both knew the truth. Mercedes Fernandez hadn't thought about finding another place. She was perfectly comfortable in her daughter-in-law's apartment and had no intention of changing that. Fine, he finally said. Let's say you're right. But 15,000 pesos is too much. How about 8? After all, she's your mother-in-law, not a stranger. I consulted with a realtor. Elena opened the folder and laid out a printout of similar rental listings. Look here, similar apartments in this neighborhood rent for 15 to 18,000 pesos. I've already dropped it by 3,000, considering the family ties. Carlos quickly skimmed the list, his face growing darker. And you're really ready to evict her if she doesn't pay? She'll have a choice, Elena said firmly, pay the market price or find cheaper accommodation. You can rent a one-bedroom in a residential area for 10,000 pesos. That's within the means of a working person. What job are you talking about? She's 58. Many people work even at 60 and 65. Elena countered. Your mother is healthy, educated, and fully capable of finding something manageable, an administrator, a consultant. There are plenty of jobs for older people. She's already worked her share. Carlos said stubbornly. And she deserves a rest. Rest is when you live off your savings or pension. Elena was starting to lose patience. But when you live off your children, who deny themselves everything, that's parasitism. Don't you dare talk about my mother like that. Carlos slammed his fist on the table. How else should I call it? Elena raised her voice. She sold her apartment, blew the money on entertainment, and now thinks we should support her. Why? Because we're family? Family means mutual support. Elena opened the folder with medical documents. Look here, Miguel's surgery costs 140,000 pesos. We've only saved 60,000. If we rent out the apartment for 15,000, in 5 months we'll have the needed amount, while your mother is living in my apartment for free and going on vacation. Carlos glanced at the documents but quickly looked away. Why dramatize it? Miguel doesn't need urgent surgery. The doctor said we can wait. He said it's better to do it earlier, before autumn. Elena felt herself boiling with frustration. Don't you understand? This is about your son's health, his future. I understand everything, Carlos snapped. But you can't solve one problem by creating another. Where is Mom supposed to go? That's her problem. Elena said firmly. She's an adult, let her make adult decisions. She can find a job, rent a room, make arrangements with her friends to share rent. There are plenty of options. But I'm not letting her live at our expense while our child needs treatment. Carlos was silent for a long time, staring off into space, then looked at Elena with heavy eyes. You're putting me in a position between my mother and my wife? No, Elena shook her head. I'm putting you in a position between your mother and your son. And if you choose your mother, she swallowed the lump in her throat, maybe we should think about the future of our marriage." Carlos turned pale. "Are you threatening me with divorce?" "I'm stating a fact," Elena answered quietly. "I can't be with someone who values his mother's comfort over his own child's health. Those aren't the values on which a family can be built." "What about respecting elders?" Carlos raised his voice. "Is that not a value to you? Respect has to be mutual." Elena was exhausted, rubbing her eyes. "Your mother doesn't respect me, our decisions, or our financial situation. She manipulates you using her maternal love as leverage, and you allow it. Because she's my mother." Carlos jumped up from his chair. "I owe her a lot." "And you don't owe anything to your children?" Elena also stood up. "Or do you have a debt to your mother, but not to your son?" They stood facing each other, separated by the kitchen table and a chasm of misunderstanding. Elena saw pain and confusion in her husband's eyes, but also stubbornness. He wasn't about to back down. "I'm not going to choose," Carlos finally said. "You have to find a compromise. 8,000 pesos is a fair price for family." "No," Elena said firmly. 15,000 or find another place to live, that's my final word." "Then I don't know what to do next," Carlos shook his head. "I can't support you in this decision." "So you've already made your choice," Elena felt a tear roll down her cheek. "And it's not your family." Carlos stared at her with a mixture of anger, regret, and strange determination. "I need to think," he finally said. "I'll sleep here, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. That night, they slept in separate rooms, Carlos on the couch in the living room, her in the bedroom, listening to the children's breathing and trying to figure out how her life had gone off track. The next morning, Carlos left early, before she woke up. On the kitchen table was a note, "We'll talk tonight, I need to think things over." Elena crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. What's there to think about? The choice between her mother's well-being and her child's health seemed obvious to her. That it was a dilemma for Carlos said a lot. The workday dragged on endlessly. Elena mechanically carried out her duties at the kindergarten, smiled at the children and parents, but her thoughts were far away. What if Carlos really chooses his mother? Could she manage 2 children on her own with a mortgage and Miguel's treatment? These thoughts made her feel nauseous. During her lunch break, she called Gabriela. "How's the search for tenants going?" she asked without preamble. "There are 3 people interested," Gabriela replied cheerfully. "A couple with a child, a student girl with her mom, and a young businessman. They're all ready to pay the asking price." "When should we show the apartment?" Elena paused. Logically, they should wait for her mother-in-law's decision. Would she agree to pay the market price or move out? But something told her it was useless to wait. "Let's do it next week," she decided. "I'll send an official notice to my mother-in-law today, give her a week to make a decision. If she refuses to pay, we'll start showing the apartment." "She may just refuse to leave," Gabriela pointed out. "Then we'll have to go through the courts, and that takes time." "I know," Elena sighed, "but I hope it won't come to that. Worst case, I'll change the locks when she's not home." "That's risky," Gabriela warned. "But sometimes, that's the only way to solve the problem. Keep me posted." "Okay." After work, Elena picked up the children from daycare and headed home. On the way, her phone beeped with a new message from Carlos, "I'll be late, don't wait for me." She bit her lip, holding back her irritation. The usual avoidance tactic, hide behind work to avoid making tough decisions. Carlos came home after midnight. Elena was awake, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea. He froze in the doorway when he saw her, clearly hoping to slip in unnoticed. "Why so late?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "Work," he waved his hand vaguely. "Why aren't you sleeping?" "I was waiting for you." Elena looked up. "You promised we'd talk tonight." Carlos sighed and sat down on the chair across from her. "I talked to Mom," he started without preamble. "She agrees to pay 10,000 pesos. That's her final offer." And my final offer is 15, Elena answered calmly. Market price minus a small discount for family. Elin, that's too much. Carlos ruffled his hair in frustration. Mom only gets 5,000 pesos in pension. How is she supposed to come up with 15? From the same sources she gets money for furs, cosmetologists, and vacations, Elena shrugged. If she can afford all that, she can afford rent. You know it's different. Carlos frowned. She has some savings from selling her apartment, but it's not unlimited. Exactly. Elena leaned forward. She sold her apartment, spent the money on herself, and now wants to live at our expense. It's not fair. But 15,000. That's the market price, Carlos. Elena was starting to lose her patience. I even gave her a 3,000 discount. Do you want her to pay less? Then pay the difference yourself, not from our family budget. Carlos was silent, drumming his fingers on the table. Finally, he looked up. And what if I say I don't agree, that I'm against it if you evict my mom? Then I'll have to choose between you and the well-being of our children, Elena replied quietly. And I'll choose the children. Carlos looked at her with a mixture of anger, regret, and strange determination. You don't understand what my mother has been through, he said. She worked hard all her life, denying herself everything to raise me after my father abandoned us. She deserves a peaceful old age. I sympathize with her, Elena said sincerely, but her past struggles do not give her the right to take away our children's future. Miguel needs treatment now, not sometime later. If the choice is between your mother's comfort and your son's health, I choose my son, and I hope you'll do the same. Carlos stared at her for a long time, as if seeing her for the first time, then slowly shook his head. I can't choose, Elena, it's too hard. Then I'll choose for you. She stood up from the table. Tomorrow, I'll take your mother the official notice. She'll have a week to make a decision, and then I'll start showing the apartment to potential tenants. This is my final decision. She walked toward the kitchen door but stopped and turned back. And also, Carlos, if you can't choose between your mother and your son, I'm not sure we should stay together. Think about that. The next morning, Elena called into work and took the day off. She dropped the kids off at daycare and headed to her grandmother's apartment, where her mother-in-law now lived. The red folder with the notice lay on the passenger seat, and every time Elena glanced at it, her resolve grew stronger. She parked near the familiar building and sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering her strength. The upcoming conversation was not going to be pleasant. Finally, taking a deep breath, she grabbed the folder and headed to the entrance. The door was opened by Mercedes Fernandez, dressed in a silk robe, despite it being nearly noon. Seeing her daughter-in-law, she twisted her lips into something resembling a smile. Elena, what a surprise! Her voice held no joy. Come in, I just made tea. Thanks, but I'm in a hurry. Elena walked into the hallway but didn't take her shoes off. I brought you some documents. Documents? Mercedes Fernandez raised an eyebrow. What kind of documents? Elena opened the folder and handed her mother-in-law a copy of the notice. She pursed her lips. It's just your attitude, demanding such money from your husband's mother. What will people say? I don't care what people say. Elena snapped. I care about my son's health. And if you're not willing to pay the market price for living here, you'll have to find another place. You're kicking me out? Mercedes Fernandez stepped back, pressing her hand to her chest. Are you putting an old woman out on the street? I'm giving you a choice. Elena stood firm against the manipulation. Pay the fair price or find another place to live. And note, I'm giving you a month to find somewhere, even though you promised to stay for a couple of months and have stayed for 3 years. Does Carlos know about this? Her mother-in-law went on the offensive. Or are you acting behind his back? Carlos is fully aware. Elena lied smoothly, not batting an eye. We discussed it last night. And he agreed? Mercedes Fernandez's voice was filled with distrust. What do you think? Elena decided not to answer directly. When it comes to the health of his son or the comfort of his mother, what would he choose? Mercedes Fernandez stared at her daughter-in-law as if trying to figure out if she was bluffing. Then her face twisted into a grimace. "You've turned him against me," she almost screamed. "You've always tried to drive a wedge between us, putting a divide between mother and son. Don't dramatize." Elena used her mother-in-law's favorite phrase. "No one has turned anyone against anyone. It's just time to settle this housing issue fairly. So, will you sign the notice?" Mercedes Fernandez grabbed the pen with a trembling hand and signed the second copy with a flourish. "I'll talk to Carlos," she hissed. "Let's see what he says when he finds out how you're treating me. Be sure to talk to him." Elena's phone rang nonstop. She looked at the screen where Carlos appeared, but didn't rush to answer. She knew what the conversation would be about. Her mother-in-law had probably already called him and given her version of events, laced with tears and reproaches. Finally, after sighing, she accepted the call. "Yes," she said in a neutral tone. "Are you crazy?" Carlos's voice was filled with rage. "You've put my mom in a position without me. We discussed this last night. I said I would take the notice, and I did," she replied. "But we didn't agree on anything. I didn't give my consent. And I didn't ask for your consent." Elena gripped the phone tightly. "The apartment belongs to me, and I manage it as I see fit." A heavy silence hung on the other end of the line. "Mom's hysterical," Carlos finally said. "She says you threatened to throw her out onto the street. I gave her a choice: pay the market price or find another place to live. If that's a threat to her, then we have different understandings of the word." "Elena," Carlos took a deep breath, trying to calm down, "let's stop and think. 15,000 pesos is too much for Mom. You know her financial situation." "I know," Elena confirmed. "I know she spent the money from selling her apartment on furs, vacations, and beauty salons, and now she wants to live at our expense while our son needs expensive treatment. You can't blame her for spending her money." "I can, because she's an adult who should take responsibility for her decisions. She chose to spend it all on herself, fine. But now she can't expect free housing. She's my mother." Carlos raised his voice. "Don't you understand? I can't just throw her out." "But I can," Elena said firmly. "And I will, if she doesn't agree to my terms." "Don't you dare." Carlos's voice was filled with an unmistakable threat. "If you do that..." "What?" Elena interrupted him. "What will you do, Carlos? Divorce me? Abandon the kids? Come on, finish it." He fell silent, breathing heavily into the phone, finally saying, "I won't leave this unresolved. Mom isn't going to pay 15,000 pesos, and that's final." "Then she'll have to move out," Elena answered calmly. "She has exactly 1 month to find another place to live, and I won't extend the deadline for even a day." "We'll talk about this later," Carlos growled before hanging up. Elena slowly placed the phone on the table, feeling a mixture of emptiness and strange relief. All the cards were finally on the table. There was no turning back, only moving forward. The next days passed in tense silence. Carlos barely appeared at home, staying late at work or spending the night at his mother's. When he did come home, he barely spoke to Elena, answering her questions about work and household matters with short replies. With the children, he tried to be the same as always, playing, reading them bedtime stories, taking them to the park. But as soon as they went to sleep, the house fell into oppressive silence. One evening, when Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, reviewing bills, Carlos unexpectedly sat down across from her. "I've thought a lot," he began without preamble, "and I've come up with a compromise." Elena lifted her gaze from the screen, mentally preparing for another round of negotiations. "I'm listening." 12,000 pesos, Carlos placed a sheet of calculations in front of her. "Mom will pay 8, and I'll add 4 from my personal money, not from the family budget." Elena studied the figures carefully. "Why not 15? Why should I lose 3,000 every month?" Because she's my mother, damn it. Carlos slammed his fist on the table. I can't charge her the full market price. You can, Elena calmly replied, but you don't want to and are asking me to take on some of your moral obligations. Carlos pinched the bridge of his nose, trying to hold back his irritation. Elena, let's be realistic. If you insist on your way, it will be the end of our marriage, our family, everything. Are you willing to do that over 3,000 pesos? Not over 3,000, Elena shook her head. Over principle. Your mother needs to understand that she can't manipulate us anymore, that our family and our children are more important than her comfort. But this is a compromise. I'm offering a solution where everyone is at least somewhat happy. Elena paused. Carlos's proposal wasn't perfect, but it was significantly better than the current situation. And if he was truly going to pay from his own personal funds, not from the family budget. I have conditions, she finally said. We make an official rental agreement with a clause that says if the payment is delayed by more than 2 weeks, the contract will be automatically terminated. Why such strict terms? Carlos frowned. Because I don't trust your mother, Elena replied bluntly. And I want legal grounds to evict her if she starts playing her games again. Carlos was silent for a long time, staring at the table between them as if it were a front line. Okay, he finally said, the contract should be written in a way that doesn't humiliate Mom. No clauses like if there's a violation, throw her things on the street, and so on. I'll make a standard rental agreement, Elena nodded, the same as what's used for any other tenants, no humiliation, but no concessions either. Deal, Carlos extended his hand across the table. Elena hesitated for a moment, then shook it. Elena hesitated, then shook his hand. Her husband's hand was cold and tense, just like the atmosphere between them. The agreement was drafted and signed. Mercedes Fernandez carried herself with offended dignity, deliberately not looking at her daughter-in-law during the signing process. However, she was particularly affectionate with her son, constantly thanking him for his protection and support. Elena paid no attention to these theatrical gestures. What mattered to her was the result. Her mother-in-law had agreed to pay rent, though not the full amount, but that meant she could start saving money for treatment. However, Elena understood that this victory was only a temporary truce. The real problem was deeper. Her husband turned out to be incapable of putting the interests of his new family above the desires of his mother, and this realization gnawed at her from the inside, even poisoning those rare moments when she and Carlos managed to get along. Soon enough, what Elena had secretly expected happened. Her mother-in-law paid the first installment on time, the second with a week's delay, and by the third month, the familiar excuses started. You understand, Elena, Mercedes Fernandez said in a sweet voice over the phone, I've run into some difficulties. I had to help a friend, she's in a tough situation, I couldn't refuse. Maybe I'll pay a little less this month, and then make up the difference next month? No, Elena replied firmly. We agreed on 15,000 pesos per month. If you don't have enough, ask Carlos, but I expect the full amount no later than the 5th. You're so heartless, her mother-in-law sighed. You're willing to torment an elderly woman over some money. Some money is for your grandson's treatment, Elena reminded her. And I'm not going to deny him surgery for your comfort. There was a pause at the other end, then an irritated voice came through. Fine, I'll talk to Carlos. As expected, the conversation with Carlos didn't take long to come. He stormed into the house late in the evening, after the children had already gone to bed, his face red with anger. What did you say to my mom? He snapped at his wife. She's crying, saying you threatened to evict her. I told her I'm expecting the full amount by the 5th, as stated in the agreement we all signed, Elena answered calmly. But she's really in trouble. She helped a friend with her treatment. And who's going to help our son? Elena crossed her arms over her chest. Your mother has money if she can help her friends, but she's reluctant to spend the same money on her own grandson. You're being unfair. Carlos raised his voice. Mom has always helped us. She babysat, she cooked. When it's convenient for her. Elena interrupted. But when we need money for Miguel's treatment, suddenly there are other priorities. They were once again standing on opposite sides of the barricade, and Elena suddenly realized with piercing clarity that this would never change, no matter what happened. Carlos would always defend his mother and her interests, would always justify her actions even when they contradicted the well-being of his own children. And then she made the final decision. "I'm filing for divorce," Elena said quietly. Carlos froze mid-sentence, staring at her with disbelief. "What?" "I'm filing for divorce," she repeated more firmly. "I can't and don't want to live in a marriage where my husband puts his mother's interests above the health of our children." "You've lost your mind?" Carlos turned pale. "Destroying the family over some money?" "Not over money," Elena shook her head. "Over betrayal. You've betrayed us, Carlos. Me, Sofia, Miguel. You chose your mother, and that's your right, but I choose my children, and that's mine. You can't just—" "I can," she interrupted. "And I will. I'm filing the petition tomorrow and starting the property division procedure." "We barely have anything, except the mortgage," Carlos sneered, as if that were a solid argument. "Exactly." Elena nodded. "And we have 2 children who need a father capable of standing up for their interests. But, apparently, they'll have to do without that." She turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving Carlos standing in the middle of the kitchen with his mouth open. His last words reached her in the hallway. "You'll regret this. You'll come back with your tail between your legs." Elena didn't turn around. The divorce petition was filed the next day. Carlos, despite his threats, tried to talk Elena out of it, suggesting they discuss everything one more time, but she was firm. The decision had been brewing for months, with each new instance when her husband chose his mother over the family. When the news of the impending divorce reached Mercedes Fernandez, it caused a real scandal. The mother-in-law arrived at their house unannounced, shouting, accusing Elena of all the wrongs, calling her the destroyer of the family and a heartless witch. "After everything I've done for you," she wailed while Carlos unsuccessfully tried to calm her down. "I gave you everything, and you, ungrateful, make me out to be a monster and ruin my son's life." Elena silently watched the spectacle, feeling nothing but exhaustion and a final certainty that her decision was the right one. When the stream of accusations ended, she calmly asked, "Are you finished? Now listen to me. First, the decision to divorce was made by me, not your son. Second, the reason is not you, but Carlos's inability to be a husband and father, not just a son. And third, if you don't pay the rent by the end of the week, I'll start the eviction process. Divorce is one thing, business is business." In the ensuing silence, the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard. Mercedes Fernandez looked as though she had been slapped in the face. Carlos stood, his head lowered, too ashamed to look at either his mother or his wife. You monster." Finally, the mother-in-law squeezed out. "Heartless, calculating monster." "No." Elena shook her head. "I'm just a mother protecting her children. And if that makes me a monster in your eyes, then we really have different values." After this incident, Mercedes Fernandez stopped communicating directly with Elena. All communication went through Carlos, who bounced between the 2 women, trying to please both, and invariably displeasing both sides. The rent was paid on time, but that didn't stop Mercedes from telling all her acquaintances the story of the cruel daughter-in-law who takes money from her elderly mother-in-law and destroys the family for profit. Elena ignored these conversations. She had neither the time nor the desire to engage in an information war. The divorce process moved forward. Since she and Carlos didn't have significant joint property, except the mortgage department, the main disputes concerned the children and alimony. Carlos insisted on joint custody. Elena didn't mind, but with the condition that the children would live with her, and their father could visit them on designated days. Preparing court documents, meeting with lawyers, working, taking care of the children, all of this took so much energy that Elena almost didn't notice the passage of time. The days blurred into a continuous stream of tasks and responsibilities, leaving no room for regret or sadness. Perhaps it was for the best. One evening, after picking up the children from daycare, Elena found Gabriella at the door with a large bouquet of flowers. "What are you doing here?" she asked, surprised, as she unlocked the door. "I came to congratulate you." Gabriella handed her the flowers. "Happy birthday." "You forgot, didn't you?" Elena blinked in confusion. Indeed, today was May 17th, her birthday. In the rush of the past few weeks, she had completely forgotten about it. "Oh, right," she smiled sheepishly. "Thank you. Come in." After putting the kids in front of cartoons for 15 minutes, Elena led her friend to the kitchen. Gabriella took a bottle of wine and a box with cake out of her bag. "I know you're in full saving mode right now, but birthdays are sacred," she declared, opening the box. "Every woman deserves a celebration, especially one as brave as you." "Brave?" Elena smirked as she poured the wine. "Not sure if that's the right word." "Oh, it's the perfect word." Gabriella poured the wine. "You know how many women put up with this for years? Live with mommy's boys, let their mothers-in-law control them, give up their own interests, and you didn't hesitate to change everything. That takes a lot of courage." Elena thoughtfully swirled her wine glass. "I don't feel brave, I feel desperate. When the choice is between your child's health and your husband and mother-in-law's comfort. You made the right choice." Gabriella finished for her. "And by the way, how's the apartment situation? Is Mercedes Fernandez paying?" "For now, yes." Elena took a sip of wine. "Carlos adds money from his own funds, so she's holding onto the opportunity. But I'm sure that as soon as the divorce is finalized, problems will start. Then kick her out and rent the apartment to normal people." Gabriella shrugged. "I always have interested tenants for such a place." Elena nodded. The thought no longer filled her with fear or doubt. If necessary, she would evict her mother-in-law without hesitation. She had learned to put the well-being of her children above everything else, and it felt unexpectedly freeing. "How's Miguel's treatment going?" Gabriella asked, cutting the cake. "Are you managing to collect the needed amount?" "Almost." Elena smiled. 2 more months of rental payments, and we'll be able to pay for the surgery. The doctor says the latest test results are promising, so we have time." They sat in the kitchen late into the evening, recalling funny stories from life, discussing future plans, just chatting about everything. Elena couldn't remember the last time she had felt so light and at ease, as though the enormous burden she had been carrying for years had suddenly lightened. A week after her birthday, Elena received a call she had secretly been waiting for and dreading. The unknown number appeared on the phone screen, but she instantly recognized the voice. "Elena, it's Mercedes Fernandez. We need to talk." "Hello." Elena deliberately kept her voice neutral. "I'm listening." Not over the phone, her mother-in-law said unusually softly. "Can we meet? There's an important matter to discuss." Elena mentally went through the possible reasons for such a call, most likely more issues with the rent payment or another attempt at manipulation. "All right," she agreed. "Tomorrow at 12 o'clock at the cafe. I'll need to leave in an hour, so let's get straight to the point." Agreed. Mercedes Fernandez paused for a second. "And thank you." That thank you made Elena more cautious than anything. Over the years of knowing her mother-in-law, she couldn't recall a time when she had sincerely thanked her. The next day, leaving the kids with a neighbor, Elena arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early. To her surprise, Mercedes Fernandez was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She didn't look as well-groomed as usual. Her hair was tied in a simple bun, there was minimal makeup, and her clothes were modest. "Hello." Elena sat across from her. "I'm listening." Her mother-in-law seemed noticeably nervous, fiddling with a napkin, avoiding eye contact. "I'm selling some things," she began without preamble. "A fur coat, jewelry, I've signed a contract with an antique store to sell some old furniture." "And why are you telling me this?" Elena asked, as the silence stretched. "I want to move out." Mercedes Fernandez raised her eyes. "I found a room in a communal apartment near a friend, not expensive, though it's not great, of course." Elena remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Something didn't add up with this sudden change of heart. The thing is, her mother-in-law swallowed, I won't be able to pay for the next month at all. Carlos refused to give me money. He said he can't take more from the budget, especially now that he has to pay alimony. So, this was it. Carlos had finally stopped supporting his mother at the expense of the family. And? Elena raised an eyebrow. What do you want from me? Sometime, Mercedes Fernandez lowered her eyes. I need 2 weeks to sell my things and move out. I know I'm supposed to vacate the apartment immediately if I don't pay, but I'm asking you to give me those 2 weeks without payment, and then I'll leave, and you can rent the apartment to anyone you want. Elena carefully studied her mother-in-law's face. There was no sign of the usual arrogance or feigned martyrdom. For the first time in all their years of knowing each other, Mercedes Fernandez was speaking to her as an equal, without manipulation, just stating her request. Why did you decide to move out now? Elena asked. You've been living here for free for 3 years. You could have kept suing, appealing to family ties. Because I'm tired, her mother-in-law suddenly answered honestly. I'm tired of being the cause of conflict between my son and his wife, tired of feeling like a freeloader. And I'm guilty to you and the grandchildren. Elena struggled to suppress her surprise. An admission of guilt from Mercedes Fernandez was unbelievable. And what exactly are you guilty? She asked, wanting to hear it directly. Her mother-in-law sighed heavily. I selfishly took advantage of your kindness. I spent the money from selling the apartment on foolish things, though I could have bought myself a modest place. I didn't take Miguel's illness seriously, though I saw how much you were suffering. She paused. And I turned Carlos against you all these years. I liked that he was always on my side, that I could influence your decisions. Elena listened silently to this unexpected confession, feeling a strange emotion, not satisfaction from victory, but rather emptiness. Too late for these words, too much pain and disappointment. Why are you telling me this now? She finally asked. When everything is already decided? Mercedes Fernandez lowered her gaze. Because I only just realized what I'm really losing. Not the apartment, but the family. Carlos, he's changed. He hasn't spoken to me for 3 days. He said that because of me, he lost his wife and a normal life with children. Elena looked at the elderly woman with almost pity. For the first time in all these years, she saw not an enemy, but just an old woman, tangled up in her own selfishness. Can you really move out in 2 weeks? She asked practically. Yes, I give you my word. My friend Conchita has agreed that I can stay with her until I settle down. And I still have some savings. Mercedes hesitated. The ones I was saving for the Cancun trip with Carlos. Elena smiled bitterly. All right, 2 weeks. But no further extensions. Thank you. Mercedes suddenly straightened up. And one more thing. I know you're saving money for Miguel's surgery. I have some antique earrings. They were passed down to me from my mother. The antique dealer is offering 20,000 pesos for them. I want that money to go toward your grandson's treatment. Elena froze, her mouth half open. This was the last thing she expected. You don't have to. I do, Mercedes cut her off firmly. I'm his grandmother, even if I've been a bad one. Mercedes Fernandez kept her word. Exactly 2 weeks later, Elena received the keys to the apartment and found it in perfect condition, cleaned, with flowers on the windowsill and a note, "Thank you for your patience. I'm sorry I understood too late." That same day, Gabriela brought the first tenants, a young couple with a 1-year-old child, ready to pay 3 months' rent in advance. Miguel's surgery was scheduled for July. The money was enough thanks to the unexpected gift from her mother-in-law, the first payments from the new tenants, and extra tutoring hours Elena had been taking on all this time. Carlos came to the hospital on the day of the surgery. He stood in the corridor, nervously fiddling with a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, looking so lost that Elena for a moment felt a pang of pity. "Can I stay?" he asked quietly. "I want to be there when he wakes up." She nodded silently. Miguel should have his father, no matter what. The surgery was successful. When Miguel opened his eyes and weakly smiled at seeing both parents by his side, Elena noticed tears in Carlos's eyes. "I've messed everything up, haven't I?" he asked later, when the boy had fallen asleep again. "I put my mother above you and the kids." "Yes," Elena answered simply. "And you lost us. Can I fix this?" His voice held such hope that Elena felt a sharp pain. "Making everything like it was, no. But being a good father, learning to respect my boundaries, and stopping living in the shadow of your mother, that you can do. And over time, maybe we'll learn to be good parents together, even if not as husband and wife." 6 months passed. Miguel fully recovered from the surgery. The doctors were surprised at how quickly he recovered. It seemed like every day he was getting stronger, more like a regular energetic boy. Elena changed jobs. Now she was teaching Spanish to foreigners at a private school, earning twice as much as she did at the daycare. Carlos paid alimony on time and spent weekends with the children, trying to be a real father, not just a visitor in their lives. Mercedes Fernandez moved into a small apartment near her friend. To everyone's surprise, she found a job as an administrator at a small hotel, where her knowledge of languages and inherent snobbery came in handy. She regularly visited the grandchildren, but now she asked for permission from Elena before coming, and never stayed longer than agreed. One day, when picking up the kids after the weekend, Elena noticed a strange change in the relationship between Carlos and his mother. They were talking calmly, but with a distance that had never been there before. When Mercedes left, Elena couldn't resist asking, "Did something happen between you two?" Carlos looked pensively out the window. "I just finally saw the truth. Mom always put her interests above mine, just like I put hers above ours." It was a vicious cycle. Elena was silent, trying to process these words. There was an understanding in them that she had been trying to reach for years. "And you know what's the strangest thing?" he continued. "When I stopped dancing to her tune, she started respecting me. For the first time in my life." On Miguel's birthday, his first after the surgery, they all gathered together at a small restaurant. Sofia was already 8 and adored her younger brother, taking care of him with affectionate attention. Miguel blew out the candles on his cake, and the room erupted in applause. "What did you wish for?" Elena asked, hugging her son. "That we always stay together," the boy whispered in her ear. Elena looked at her children, at Carlos, who was sincerely trying to change, at Mercedes, who was sitting modestly in the corner, not trying to draw attention, and suddenly, she felt a strange sense of peace. They were no longer a family in the traditional sense. She and Carlos would never return to their former relationship, too much pain, too many disappointments. But they had found a new way to be together for the sake of the children, respecting each other's boundaries and needs. And her grandmother's apartment really had become the support Dolores had talked about. Thanks to it, Miguel received the necessary treatment, Elena gained financial independence, and Mercedes Fernandez got the chance to rethink her life and her relationships with loved ones. An apartment is a support under your feet. You never know when it will be needed. Old Dolores was wiser than anyone could have imagined. And now, looking at her son's happy face, Elena was grateful for that inheritance, not so much for the walls themselves, but for the opportunity to make the right choice when the time came.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.